making fun of me for my Southern accent.
Cheerio.
Does he make fun of you because he thinks your Southern accent is not legit?
Well, he thought it was not legit. And then the last people that I did it for were from South Carolina. And it was a husband and wife, and they came up and cried.
And so they believed it.
They were like, you got it so well. And I was like, ah. So
apparently it's not bad.
Yeah, I guess.
So today is Monday, September 18th. Welcome to Solid Ground live stream. David's not with us today. He's taking a much deserved vacation. And we have Carob Bartholomew here with us. So thank you so much for being with us today, Carob.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are going to talk about one of the big things that keeps coming up is this discussion around banning books in school libraries. And what is meant by this? It seems like there's a lot of oversimplification of this issue on the mainstream, or maybe call it the left, accusing parents who are concerned about some of the materials being found in school libraries of book banning and this censorship kind of idea, which kind of, I mean, a lot of us are aware at this point that that's a very naive understatement of what's happening right now, or not even understatement, it's just a misstatement, because what's going on right now is that there's a lot of inclusion of materials for specific purposes that we probably always would have found really alarming. But that's a big topic, so let's go into that some more. And with David not here to introduce Solid Ground, how about Deborah? You can do your best David impression and see what you can do with that.
I don't know if I can do the British accent. It's hard enough for me to figure out what does he usually say. Let's see. Well, Solid Ground is a peer support community for people who are contending with critical social justice in their workplace, with their schools, in society more broadly, and also COVID mandates and other sorts of forms of or authoritarian measures that we're sort of seeing in our society today. What else do we usually say? I'm forgetting. I know there's the part that we say that we are offering this is neither legal advice nor could be construed as therapy.
Weekly
drop-in. Yes, we have weekly. We have 4 weekly drop-in meetings. And if you're interested, you can go to solidgroundsupport.com. And from there, you can read more about us and also potentially join our locals community.
Excellent. Very good. Yes, I think that hits all the points. And yep, we miss David, but we'll see him in a couple of weeks. I think he'll be gone next week too. And then we are taking a break. We're going to have a week off from live streaming. So just make a note if you're somebody who catches us every week. We'll be gone on the 9th of October. So we're taking a little hiatus. All of our groups, we're going to pause our groups and our live stream that week and take a week off. So just a heads up. We'll remind you as we get closer, though. So, Carob, I saw this thing you posted on Twitter, and I had seen it already somewhere else, but I just saw it again this morning and was reminded. Is a Canadian school, is it a district, has now eliminated from their school libraries any books that were published before 2008.
Yes.
And that is really striking. So, when you saw that, what were your thoughts, and what do you think about what's going on there?
Well, they're erasing history as fast as they possibly can. There's so many good character building books throughout all of history. And there's also books that warn us about what's in our future, right? Or what could be our future. And they're erasing all of them to go to 2008, which is an interesting time to choose. I don't know why they would choose that exact time to consider that those are the books that are the only books relevant for kids. I know that when I'm looking for homeschool curriculum, I'm oftentimes looking for books before, I always say before 2020. I'm looking for anything published before then. But yeah, it's interesting to have all of those books taken out, especially by people. This is Canada. It's extremely liberal, and especially by the same people who would say that conservatives are all about banning books, want them removed, call them book burners or whatever else, when Canada has actually had book burnings.
Well, and this is quite the move as well. I mean, if people are accused of banning books for raising concerns about books with explicit content in them, how is it not book banning on a much broader scale to just say that anything published before 2008 is not allowed to be included for students to use for school?
Yeah, I feel like that's the law of projection.
Mhm.
But to such an extreme that if you can't see that it's a problem now, I really don't know how you help a person.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Deborah, did you see this article also?
I did. So the part that I have in my mind is the picture of the shelves, because they had a photo, right? And it was like mostly empty shelves with like a few books on each row. And so it was just so stark. It just felt, aside from just the whole problem of it, you just imagine there's only this much information available. Your world has become so spare somehow, on top of all the information and facts you're not being allowed to have access to anymore.
Yeah, that is a really good point. The limited amount of information, and Carob, what you said about erasing history,
Right.
it's I guess I'm having trouble even fathoming that this is a decision that somebody made at a school board, that our children should have access only to books from the last, not even 20 years. Yeah.
Well, this is more
15.
DEI for our kids, right? I mean, they have to be books that are inclusive, and books that foster belonging, and books that foster a specific idea set. If you look at scholastic books, I'm sure we all got them as kids, those the book magazines, and we would choose whatever books, and those books now are absolutely, I mean, some of them even have LGBTQIA sections for the books, even for the smallest, even for K-3. They have these kind of books in them. And so they're going to be able to fill those shelves, just with what they deem as appropriate for the greater good, which is extremely frightening.
In the chat, let's see, Stella says, Diary of a Young Girl, transphobic due to the word girl. Is that true, or is that just a suggestion? Because I could see that being something. I mean, as we pick things apart and continue to pick them apart this way.
That's interesting.
Go ahead.
Okay, so right now there is a new Anne Frank, and it's a graphic novel, and it really pushes her lesbian feelings.
Oh, wow.
In the book. And so they do say that that's true, that she did have lesbian feelings, but you need to remember she was 13, and this was during World War II. So there wasn't a lot that was happening. Besides that, she was locked in a room. So basically she says in her book, I appreciated the female figure. I don't think that makes her a lesbian. She also has that relationship with Peter.
Yeah. Well, that's so, it seems so irreverent to create an entire political projection of a person who can't speak for herself at this point based on, and she was so young. I mean, who's to know how she would have felt as time unfolded for her.
Right. And I need to correct that. I can't remember if she was 13 or 15 when she died. Was she 15? I think she might have been 15.
I actually don't remember.
But she was too young. There was no way that a Jewish family was going, there's no way that she experimented. So she could have just been questioning. But now the book, now that it's a graphic novel, but now this graphic novel has pictures that has her like walking through a park and just staring at and really admiring the nude figure. And I don't think that that's that abnormal for a young person to do, but they push it. So that's interesting that somebody would say that it's trans. So I have not heard that. I just knew that it is pushing. They want to find as many they want to recreate history to put as many queer experiences as possible into it. which is dishonest.
Yeah, it's the going back. I know that they did that with Joan of Arc and with a couple of other notable female figures in history. They're trying to call them gender nonconforming and fit them into our contemporary framework for gender identity. Oceana 23 says, speaking of books, have you covered Emily Drabinski yet, the president of the American Library Association?
She was shocking. Do you guys know about her? If anybody else?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. She was shocking because the first thing that she said was, I can't believe that they elected a queer Marxist. My mother's going to be so proud of me and how we're going to change the world. And then this book overtaking started. And the thing is that I used to be a volunteer librarian. So I worked in my son's schools all the way through a couple days a week. And I've even put books on the shelves that now I'm disappointed that I didn't know what they were. Mm-hmm. One book is Haunted. And the guy, he wrote some books about a dog, and he also wrote Fight Club.
Oh, Chuck Palahniuk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he has
that's that book, Fight Club. I've read that recently. I wouldn't want that in a children's book collection.
So he's got these short stories, and they're available on YouTube. And you listen to them, because I picked them up because I thought that they would be great books for the Boy Scouts when going camping. And then I was like, oh no, they talk about ejaculating in a pool and all of your coming up around you. And it's like, why? That is, yeah.
Yeah, like, let's get together in a circle, kids, and read this nice story. Oh.
Right. About a circle.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
it seems like there's so many issues. There's let's get a political message, and then there's this lack of recognition of developmental, like developmental psychology. Just throughout all of this, and that notion of what's appropriate at what age just seems to get thrown out the window.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's about Gramsci. That is Antonio Gramsci, and trying to sexualize kids at a young age so that you can remove their reliance on their family. And it really all comes down to destroying the family unit. So if kids, first off, I'm not trying to be vulgar, but think about like when you started having sex, or when you started thinking about sex. For most of us, when we get to that point where we're thinking about sex as a young person, it's pretty much all we think about when you get to that point. So if they can make the kids think about that a lot younger, then that's all they're going to think about. And all of the other concerns, responsibilities, growing up and being a productive member of society, it's all about your pleasure. And if somebody denies you your pleasure, then they are mean or they are wrong. And like I said the other day when I was on, if you can convince people that other people are mean and they are wrong or they are harmful because they don't give you exactly what you want, it is a whole lot easier to put them on boxcars in the future. So,
yeah, if you're imagining this or if your framework for understanding this is that this is all of this cultural engineering, this social engineering is set up in order to make people more manageable from a governmental standpoint, more easily managed in this technocratic, society, then you'd want people who were very distracted and very busy with things that are important in their own little sphere, so you can shuffle them around the way that you feel like you should. But so there's that framework. But even if you don't think of it that way, and you just imagine this as sort of a process of entropy and just cultural decay, it is really interesting to see the devolution of sexual morality over the last several decades get to this point where, and I never would have thought I'd spend so much time talking about this in my life. Like, what a weird topic to end up on all the time. Like talking about our base animal desires and instincts and behaviors, but it's everywhere. It's just, it's inescapable, this whole pushing of sex and sexuality into the forefront of conversation. And so we're at this point where, like you said, it's just enjoy your pleasures, focus on your pleasures, obsess over
And it
what is
does
my
turn
sexuality.
when you said that base and animal, I think about the kids, and especially those minority kids who are out on top of cars twerking and wearing almost nothing, and
Mhm.
how base and animalistic that, and that's where it ends.
Mhm.
You know, well, I think it probably ends in a worse place than that, but that's where it leads to.
Mhm.
So you have to
There's
think
so
about
many-
that. Is that what you want for your kids? Sorry, go ahead.
No, there's just so many currents here, like, because there's whoever realized the sexual thing was a revolutionary pathway, right? So there's like people that are using it politically. Then there's just general, maybe liberal, let's be free. We don't want to be, we were so repressed. Women couldn't even have a sexual, life. Like, so there's people kind of thinking that. Then there's just technology and every notion of convenience and instantaneous satisfaction of, like, I order this, Amazon drops it immediately, whatever. And so there's like that factor, and like, let's apply that to sex. I mean, there's like, and all these things are just kind of converge and push this thing. And there's probably other factors too, but those are three I can think of that are pushing this along in this way. And again, if we weren't this instantaneous, there's this huge problem with this instantaneous, I just want something, so I should just have it. And if you don't give it to me, you're violating my human rights.
Mhm. Mhm. Let's see. Seven Serpents says in the chat, can we coexist in a society with people determined to force these ideologies onto everyone? I think that's a really good question, because if you are, I find this to be paradoxical in some ways, because I really value autonomy and individuality and not being forced to conform to, certain social standards. And yet, does that lead to such a degree of tolerance of other behavior that things that are unacceptable? I mean, what is the framework? What is the wall against which you back yourself in order to make such an invitation of openness to everyone else? And how do we tolerate things that are intolerable? And where do we draw our lines if we value individual expression?
Yeah, I think that I'm always reminded, and I don't know what book it comes from, but it says, when you were in charge, I asked you for freedom, or I asked you for mercy because that's according to your ways. When I was in charge, you asked me for freedom and I gave you none because that's according to mine. And I think that's what we need to realize, is that we are weaponized. Our empathy, our kindness, our kind of Judeo-Christian do unto others as you would have them, treat others the way you want to be treated, right? That is not their goal. And it's really sad, because forever, that's the way that we look at things. So I'm going to treat you with kindness, dignity, and respect, and you're going to do the same for me. But it is not what's being taught now. What's being taught is there is no truth but power, and they have it, and they don't want to let it go. So I think your only choice is to stand up and say no, because so many people will say, oh, I totally appreciate that. I totally understand that. But when I ask them very, very basic questions, so people will say, oh, equity, it sounds like a wonderful thing. And I'm like, okay, well, are you willing to give up your $900,000 home or your $1 million home to live in a $200,000 home so we can all be equitable? Okay, so you appreciate this concept of no innocence for children, that's a myth. And I wonder, from you guys all being in the mental health thing, have you ever heard that? Because I'm hearing that a lot lately, the myth of innocence.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering how many people are willing to say, oh, it's okay. This man next door, he's a minor attracted person. So I'm going to let my child go over and hang out with this person because I just want to be tolerant. Who's going to do that? It's so much virtue signaling, when behind closed doors, I think most people, I would hope most people are like, you will touch my child over my dead body. But the myth of innocence is a question I would love to ask, because I've heard school psychologists say this, they've posted it online. That's a myth. We need to get away from that. Were you guys taught that craziness?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. No, no. I'm glad I am the age I am, because when I went through my master's program, I think we were still fairly grounded in reality and understanding basic human development and needs and family relationships. And we were taught that exposing children to sexual content that's inappropriate for their age is actually a form of sexual abuse. And I still 100% agree with that, because that is sexualizing the child, much in the same way that making inappropriate comments or touching a child would be sexualizing them and drawing them into that frame of being and thinking earlier than they are ready for it, when it is absolutely not to their benefit at all. It is for the benefit of an adult who is crossing a very important boundary. So no, we were absolutely not taught that. We were not taught that, it wasn't blank slateism either, that children are just this completely blank slate that, society writes upon. We were taught basically the biopsychosocial model, that your biology determines aspects of who you become, as well as the environment in which you grow up. But there was no efforts whatsoever to undermine the concept of kids having innocence and of needing that innocence to be protected so that they could grow up in time and make the developmental gains in the proper time.
It's strange too, because I think I'm wondering how many people that might push this innocence thing on a sexual level, would they then agree, okay, then we should also show children violent films, they can handle that too? I mean, I don't know if they'd go, oh wait, that I probably wouldn't do, or I don't know. I don't know if when they have this innocence thing, if they also think we should just, show them violent movies and take them to dangerous parts of town and
or
they agree with that?
Or send them to work in factories at really young ages, like we used to.
Yeah, they're like little adults.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to read a couple things from the chat here. So first of all, Joel Henry says David had a facelift, which maybe he's taking 2 weeks off. So we'll see what he looks like when he gets back. So maybe. Paul McAuliffe says the abundance of porn and porn addicted people explains a lot. Sex is on most people's minds very often, or the industry wouldn't be booming like it is. And that seems like a chicken and egg question to me. There's some feedback loop happening with that. I think that's a really great thing to explore in detail, but I think that's a really good point. And Miroir Jumeau says, Amish have extreme views, but they manage not to push them on the rest of us. Ditto Orthodox Jews, etc. That's a really good point. That is a good response to what Seven Serpents said. So can we coexist with people who are determined to force these ideologies onto everyone? I don't know. Can we control the degree to which they're allowed to force these ideologies onto everyone? Because I'm sure there are lots of people who have views that they think everybody else should share, but they don't have the power to force and coerce people into having to follow these views or participate. So I don't know. That's a really good question. And that's a good response. There are people with extreme views, but should they be given the power to force other people to fall in line?
I don't care. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Deborah.
I don't care if you said this, but and the other factor or another factor in this is there was no discussion, right? Like suddenly this is in front of your child and no one ever said, oh, what do you think about this? Or we're thinking of introducing these new ways of thinking about these things. We just wanted to give you parents a heads up, right? It's just snuck in front of them.
Yeah. Nobody's opinion was asked, and our opinions were also not asked in the mental health profession when people decided that the proper approach to take to somebody who is voicing the idea that they were born in the wrong body. We have just been told without any discussion that the proper approach is to immediately affirm that person, linking them to resources, to get hormones, to perhaps have surgery, that we just support them. And there isn't any other area of psychotherapy where we just automatically encourage and support. We explore, we seek to understand, but none of this stuff has been discussed. It hasn't been discussed in schools. It hasn't been discussed in people's workplaces. All of a sudden, people are being subjected to these trainings that are telling them you are part of white supremacy just by existing. Nobody was asked if they adhere to those views, if they'd like to hear more about that. It is absolutely being imposed upon people.
You're being colonized, or we're being colonized.
Yeah, exactly.
We are completely just these things that they go and they scream, this is why it needs to be burned down. This is why we need to go to this pre-civilization time. Whatever, is because same thing that they're saying that we are doing, they are doing to us. And I don't understand why, but I know one of the things that's happening right now is that, like, Utah has a Department of Families. So there are people who their job is to make sure that families are basically falling in line. And now they're having this liaison between the schools and parents to teach parents how to interact properly. And there's things that within that where they're saying that I don't remember exactly how it's put. Our culture and our religion can be harmful, and they want these experts to teach parents why, and the parents are just supposed to accept it, and they're afraid not to accept it because they don't want to be called names. And I don't understand how we got to this point of cowardice. Like, the first time you get called names, yeah, it hurts. But after a while, it's like, okay, you get called names, or your child becomes one of them.
Yeah.
Call me whatever you want to.
Yeah. Stella says it was all dumped on us like a mudslide in the middle of the night. And that's, I like that description. The sense of being colonized, of not being asked, of not being debated. And this is one of the things that really struck me when I was in this counseling program, being taught this way of thinking about race. Specifically, we spent a lot of time on race. And the way that we were being taught was so alien to me, and it was so opposite of the way I'd been taught growing up, that no, you can know the content of someone's character and their experiences by looking at their skin. This is what I'm being taught in a graduate counseling program, to judge people based on their skin color. And it felt like, well, every other theory, every other modality or approach there's a history of that. We talk about how we came to think this way, what the evolution of this thought was. Is it still very widely used? What has it inspired? It's like you draw these connections. You spend a lot of time in social sciences dissecting how you came to think the way you do. And this one way of thinking, we didn't talk about that at all. It's just the foundation through which everything else is being taught now. And it's like somebody just switched out one foundation for another with zero communication about that.
Yeah. I think quite deliberately, so that nobody would have a chance to question it or try to balance it with opposing views.
It's the only plus of the COVID lockdowns was that parents were home and saw what was going on in school sooner than they might have. It's like, it might have been a while till the kids maybe came home and said, we're doing this thing. It's a little weird.
Mirwar in the chat again, the Guide to Student Rights and Responsibilities in my local school district has anti-racism as point number 1. It includes the privilege plus power definition of racism, references to BIPOC and Asians, and then goes on to say it's in Shoreline schools immediately north of Seattle. Yeah, that's really close to where I live. And that's amazing. That's amazing. Let's see. Stella says also the idea that teachers and school administrators are allowed to are permitted to diagnose and treat children in secret. Yeah, there's a
That's a huge problem, is that there's so
Yeah.
much being done in secret.
Mhm.
And again, when they believe there is no truth but power, there is no compunction to tell you the truth. So people will just say, oh, it's not here. And one of the things I've realized just in the last week, because I was at an event and I was telling the story of Harriet Tubman, and a bunch of teachers were coming to me and they were saying, thank you for telling the story in truth and with love. And I realized, we're being trained to hate these teachers. And a lot of these teachers they are towing the line. They don't like what's happening, but it's either their insurance or even, and that you have to be fair to them in that sometimes they stay in a place they don't want to stay because they know that if they leave that space open for an activist to come in.
Mhm.
Mhm.
So there's all sorts of reasons. And then on top of that, we've got our school board and our superintendent of state taking the arrows that are pointed at them and these terrible policies and changing it from being pointed at them to pointing at the teachers, to make it look that like teachers, the parents always hate the teachers. When a lot of times I know what I'm doing, I'm standing up for the teachers who don't want to do this. I'm standing up for the librarians who don't want this in their schools, but they're the same way. They're like, if I take these books out and the activists get them, then I'm in trouble. And if I'm removed, then who's the gatekeeper between those children and this crap?
Mhm.
Sorry to be blunt, but it is so vile.
No, I think that's a really good point. And it's not fair to make assumptions about the people who are in these positions. We don't know their motivations, and they could be really complex. One of the things that I've wondered is if you're teaching this stuff and say you're full on social justice warrior teaching this stuff, with the flags and we're just coming out with it, versus you're teaching it because you have to include it, but you're not really happy about it. So you're not fully supporting it, but you are continuing to just talk about it, and you sort of soften the message so that it fits a little closer. You're kind of compromising here. Which one is doing more damage? And I've thought there is a case to be made that you're actually doing just as much, if not more damage, by soft selling this stuff, because you're presenting it in a more palatable way. And you're also modeling that we go along with this stuff, even if we don't agree with it. So I think that I think there's a case to be made that but also what you're saying, Carob, about holding a place because it's going to be filled by an activist. I think that's
I
an
think that
important
there's a way to
consideration.
teach this stuff.
Mhm.
And to say, very simple things before some people believe this and then move in, so that you're pointed it out that there are people who believe this, but then other people believe this, then you're giving them an ability to start to critically think, or at least to know that there's other ideas. So I think that that's the way, because one of the things I'm interested in, quite frankly, is winning. So how do you win in the classroom when you're taught to teach this stuff? And I know some people will say, well, let's put screens in the classroom, or let's put cameras in the classroom so that we can see everything. But then we put those good teachers at risk, because if they do water down or change a lesson, or say, today we're going to learn about propaganda, here's the 1619 project, if you do it like that, then I think that you can be a good service at the same time. You can fight back or be like Dumbledore's army. So, which is, I think there's more of that than we know. But then there's also, like, I'll have people who will constantly tell me, name and shame them, name and shame those teachers. And sometimes it's very, very tempting. But one thing is that I, quite frankly, don't want a harassment. I don't want the police coming after me and because a school district says I'm harassing. So I try to stay with the facts, keep my yeses, yeses, my no's, no's, my information very simple. But that other fact is that I'm not going to harass the teachers who do not even know. Remember, a lot of what the teachers are learning or doing right now is telling the kids to open up their laptop and take a test. They haven't even read the test themselves. So
yeah, Seven Serpents says the teachers likely see no support to lean on if they do go against the agendas and suffer the consequences. And I think that's a really, really great point. This comes back to how nuanced this issue is, because somebody else said earlier in the chat, wasn't there someone who could have said no to this at some point? I mean, and I think that everyone can say no to this at many, many points, but it's very difficult to know when to pick your point. And sometimes you're between a rock and a hard place. And I think always they're setting us up to be in a, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't kind of position. And Stella says, I know a high school English teacher who in a California district fights back by teaching Animal Farm. I think that's great. That's a good one to study right now. And so speaking of Animal Farm, and that's obviously a book from pre-2008. One of the things that comes up when we talk about books, specifically books that are being included or not included in children's libraries, and these recommended by teachers and librarians for children, there's a lot of controversy over the fact that there's so much pornographic material being included and just highly sexualized content. There's also a lot of focus on race and the way that we are now talking about race. But there are older books that focus on these issues, that talk about issues of sex and sexuality in ways that are really profound, and also talk about the experiences of people from different racial backgrounds that are historically important and sometimes very difficult to digest, and sometimes difficult issues are being brought up. How do we know where the line is now? How do we know what is our line for what is an important piece that offers a different perspective and may challenge a growing person to think about things differently? And where is the line where it's crossed over and now this is gratuitous and unacceptable?
I think we're more sensitive, rightfully so, because of like Emily Drabinski or whatever her name is of the ALA, who said, I'm going to change all of these things. And some stories are just so extremely graphic. They're so vulgar. And then there's stories, I was telling you guys before that they were making people aware on one of the pages on a librarian in the library about, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings. And I haven't read that since I was in high school, but I did read it in high school. And it was hard to read because Maya Angelou's story and my own are very, very close, which is sadly very statistically, if you are poor and Black, that is the experience for so many young women or little girls, quite frankly. And I think that hearing those stories, sometimes they really do have relevance. And if they're handled in a way that is not extremely vulgar, extremely graphic, or I think I would say some of the books are so bad that, okay, I'm just going to be honest here, which I'm not. I mean, I'm always honest, but I'm going to be vulnerable here and explain that because I was raped for 3 days when I was 5, I have dealt my entire life with fighting porn addiction. And that is, I'm not necessarily interested in visual porn. I'm interested in literary. And it's not, it's not the soft stuff. Okay. Because that's what happened to me, and that's how I first experienced sex. And if you go onto sites like Pornhub, or if you go onto sites like Hamster or whatever, you can find literary porn. Stuff that's in our kids' books is just as bad, if not worse. There are things that I've read. I'm sorry, I don't mean to cry. But there are things that I have read that parents have sent me that are worse than what's on those pages. So why we would do this to kids who've never, I mean, I know what it's like to have that problem, and why we would give that problem to kids
Mhm.
is just vicious. It's masochistic. These
Mhm.
people are sadists. And maybe they're sadists because these things have happened to them. And so they feel like they need to normalize it so that they don't feel bad about what happened to them. Because there are people, I think John Money, but I'm not sure if it was him, but somebody had said, being sexually abused isn't that bad if the parents didn't make it so bad. If they didn't make what happened, if they didn't make such a big deal about it, then it wouldn't be bad. It is bad. It is bad. But you can't.
Thank you for talking about that, Carrie. I know that's hard for you to talk about, and but you're calling out something that's, to be forced to go through this experience is life-changing and saddles you with a bunch of baggage and a bunch of difficult emotional processing that can last a lifetime. And you're saying, why give kids even a shadow of that? Why opt all kids in for that, or some version of that experience, which is what's being done if you're forcing kids to be exposed to that. I'm tempted to share a story. I'm not sure if I should go into something, but you brought it up. So you brought up something personal. So I'll share something as well. When I was a little kid, I had something happen to me that confused and scared me and made me feel really bad. So I went to talk to my mother about this, and it was something sexual. So my mom had been sexually abused as a child, and she didn't know how to handle this. And she was scared to see me. She was a young mom, really young. She didn't know how to handle her kid coming to her with these concerns. So her response was to show me the joy of sex.
Oh, wow.
So I was 4 or 5 years old. And so she thought, I'm going to show her. She didn't mean to do something that was harmful. She was doing it out of the best possible intentions. But I was a little kid, and here I am sitting with my mom, and I'm seeing these really graphic images, and she's trying to explain, context, and that this is a beautiful act between loving adults. But I was just being flooded with images, and it was a really, it was the thing that had brought me to this concern in the first place, coupled with her response to it, and the flooding of all this sexual imagery, was something that it set off a cascade of problems for me around this issue, that it was a very difficult thing to be exposed to that early. I'll just say that. I'm not claiming some kind of victimhood, but I will tell you that it messed with my mind very badly, and it impacted my own sexual development, my own ability to connect with people, and my own response to imagery and things like what you're talking about. I would almost put that in the category of, now abuse seems to imply intent. And so I can't really my mother didn't mean to do anything intentionally harmful to me at all. But the impact of what happened was similar to, some people's impact going forward if they've been exposed to things intentionally. I don't know. I don't want to villainize my mother here. That's the thing I'm trying not to do, because she's just passed away. She lived a hard life. I loved my mother very much. But anyway, the finisher says unhealed mothers do very weird things. I had a very similar experience. So thanks for sharing that, finisher. It is, but to think about how that impacted me, and think about a bunch of kids being intentionally subjected to something similar, it's like, what the heck are you guys doing? And Carrie, and with your experience being so much more damaging and so much more violating and invasive, what happened to you, you have, obviously, I'm sure that triggers a lot of emotion for you, thinking about kids being exposed to things like this.
I just know what it is. And I have seen kids who, thankfully for me, I had a different outcome, but I've seen 5-year-olds who are sexual predators. I've seen it when I was a foster parent. So why we would do that to children, it absolutely blows my mind. But more so than that is that parents can't see it, that teachers can't see it and say, yeah, fire me first.
Mm-hmm.
Because they are turning teachers into vessels. Most specifically, they're turning librarians into vessels for this very, very terrible thing. So going back to Cage Bird, as a high schooler reading that, what I think was appropriate was that the teacher brought out like 4 different books, and the only 2 I can remember are the choices were Cage Bird or Catcher in the Rye, and I just remember that because most of the boys chose Catcher. And then we had, but today I would think that a responsible teacher who's taking on this story, and again, I don't think I would take it on right now because of our volatile, where we are with race is not a place where most people can sit and objectively listen to the experience of somebody else. Now it is so laced with the whole BLM narrative, and it's just too much, I think.
Mhm.
I think that if you want to teach kids about oppression and empathy, let's go out of our own country and start, teaching them that this is a global thing that has happened. Oppression is global,
Mhm.
not just this Marxist stuff that we're going through now. So I think it's too much. But if you are going to do it, I think it's responsible to tell the parents that this is a book, that this is a book choice, and this is the content of what's in this book. If you don't want to read it, then your child can have another option. And that's responsible because there are children who can handle it. Not children. There are high schoolers who can handle it.
Yeah.
Mhm. And talking about what's acceptable for inclusion in a school catalog or school library, Miroir Jumeau says if it can't be read at a school board meeting, it's unacceptable. And I will say that I think that that's a really good point. We've all seen the videos of people reading these things and then being yanked and being told you're not allowed to say that here. And you're like, well, you got it in my kid's library. So come on, man, who am I not allowed to say this in front of? And so I think that when we're talking about things that are included in an elementary school library, that's probably a very good line to draw. But going, into older kids, you're talking about high school, even maybe middle school to some extent. This is why these are books, because they are full of depth and breadth, and the context is important. So there are going to be certain passages where if you just read it out of context, well, it would probably not be acceptable for all situations. But the idea is you're broadening someone's mind and you're exposing them to things at a staged, developmentally appropriate level. So I would say that for some high school materials, that you're giving to older adolescents, you probably wouldn't be able to read all of that, here and there at a school board meeting. But certainly for elementary school kids, that's the case.
Well, and then the other thing is that our libraries are not, they're given like displays, and this is how you should set it up. And they're making it more and more attractive and in your face. I remember it had nothing to do with graphic sense, but when I was in the library and my son was just small, he read way beyond his age. So he's like reading Animal Farm, and he's a 3rd grader. And I'm supposed to set up a board for best books for 2nd graders. And all of the books are Captain Underpants. Now I don't have an issue with Captain Underpants, except it's dumb. So but
It just sounds dumb. I don't even know what that is.
It just seemed very, just put them in a box. You're supposed, so then you make the boys lean towards these books. Well, what if the boys want to read these more advanced books? Well, they're not normal if they're not going for the big display. Now that big display is a rainbow display. It's a pride display. It's queer all the time. You get stickers that are queer and sparkly, and they'll just give them out, and kids will say, I'm part of the queer community or whatever. They don't know what they're saying. They just know that there's a lot of sponsorships. There's I think it's called Glisten, which is disgusting in itself, but it is a club. It's a club, and it sponsors all sorts of queer events in our schools. And the kids just think queer means an open mind. It just means being accepting and loving and empathetic. And they have no idea that they're turning into the Rainbow Guard because they don't know what the Red Guard is.
You're reminding me of a volunteer with FAIR, and one of our chapter leaders they might have been in Utah, I forget. They had a library situation where there were the prominent LGBTQ displays, and they were trying to figure like, okay, there's, and like, it's mostly a Mormon community, right? So I think the person went and actually spoke to the librarian, and I think purposely maybe wore a Mormon pin and said, like, what if we came and did just a total Mormon display in this library? Do you think people would be okay with that? You know, because this is a place where multiple people are coming in with different backgrounds. And I think the library like backed off a bit, and because all they were asking for was like, or maybe it wasn't the display, but it was like there was a main wall with, a bunch of books. And there's like, could we just have like more of a mix of things that would appeal to people? And I think they actually got some action on that particular one, but it sort of took him coming in, and I think he wore like a Mormon pin on his tie. Like he kind of said, well, what if I was in charge of this library and was doing that, like, how would you feel about that?
Yeah, that's a whole nother, the takeover of the Mormon faith is a whole nother conversation, because the thing is that it is part of the culture to be compliant. It just is. And I know that there are people who get upset by those comments, but that's true. And also to be empathetic and tolerant, because they were pushed out from so many different states, that being tolerant is a huge part of the culture, which is kind of crazy because that is not the way the church started at all. So it was very much, we are the one true. And now it is, we will embrace everything. We will be the kindest. And to the point, I'm going to get myself in trouble, but I would say to the point of stupidity, because we are starting to watch DEI, BLM fall, all of these different diversity, equity, and inclusion things in businesses are starting to fall apart. I know of a couple companies where they embrace this stuff, and within 9 months, we're like, nope, we're out of this thing. But yet we're still pushing it. That makes no sense. And it's the same thing with books. Like we know that the detransitioning crowd is becoming larger and larger and larger, but yet we're still pushing these ideas, and it doesn't make any sense, because for people who are constantly like, follow the science. Yeah.
I mean, there's something really obvious about one of the arguments with the LGBT stuff in schools is to say, well, we should accept these kids. These kids need to be seen that they're acceptable and that they're not going to be bullied the way that maybe a kid in the 80s or 90s would have been. We're going to make it okay to be yourself. And but how do they, the other side of the argument is you're making it so you're changing the entire field of this, and you're creating new pressures that push kids into this. Anyway, I know it's a long topic, but Charles Stanford says it's a conversation you should have soon. I've been watching it grow with growing dismay. I think Charles is referring to the Mormonism issue. I think that's when he popped up with that comment. The finisher says the amount of printed porn exposure I had in childhood is horrific. It messes you up. Absolutely. Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. Absolutely.
And I think the difference, between a book like, the Caged Bird novel, okay, that had sexual content, but that was not written for the purpose of causing sexual arousal or titillation. It was written as part of a person's experience, and was central to the story and that person's struggle and why they struggled. Whereas pornography is just written for the purpose of arousal. And what's really creepy to me is a lot of these novels, like, what is it, like Lawn Boy, Gender Queer, it's written to arouse, and it's also written to indoctrinate. So it has both the pornographic purpose and the political purpose. And the marriage of the two, I think, is just about as creepy as you can get. And if there was a novel with the quality of The Caged Bird, and it happened to have a gay main character, and the book was written with the purpose of talking about this person's life, you know, a 360-degree view of this person's life, and not written to indoctrinate or to arouse, I would have no problem with that being in a high school library. But books that have, you know, these graphic novels with things about vagina slime and blowjobs and pictures of this is sitting in elementary schools, to me, is just very clearly pornography with political intent. And that to me is the difference.
Yeah, there are people who would say that genderqueer is the story of someone's life. So it should be in there, but then you're getting into the fact that it's in pictures. And it used to be that you could not get even those kind of things if you didn't go to a sex shop and go into the back of the store.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
So to put them in our schools, and then there's also the argument that schools have a limited capacity of how many books they can put in. So why are we loading them with things?
limited shelf space, loaded up with porn.
Yeah, I also keep hearing, which I think is just a bad argument of like, well, the toothpaste is already out of the tube and these kids have already seen all this stuff, so it's better we help explain to them what fisting is, or like something like that, right? Like, you know, I mean, I just no.
Well, and then think about who did that. Who brought this into our kids' world? The same people who are healing them through social and emotional learning. You know, it was Gates, Zuckerberg Chan, who made all of these things. And quite frankly, it was China who brought all of these things through technology into our children's faces.
Yeah, the technology comment, David Moore says kids see enough pornographic adjacent material on social media. Yeah, and I think that's a whole nother topic, like how much exposure should your kids have to that? How much opportunity should they have to even look at social media? It's a whole nother topic, but yeah, agreed.
But then there's the argument that, especially in a place like Utah, where most people are pretty religious, their kids aren't getting that. There's a huge amount of kids whose or parents whose children are not getting that exposure at home. So how dare you put it in the schools where we think our kids are safe? Because maybe we're not Utah is not as religious as it used to be, but it's still very family centered. And people are very concerned about their children growing up and being productive. So at least half of them, I would say, because there's a lot that are just on a pad all the time. That's the way it is all over the place. And again, who created that problem?
Oh, by the way,
Go
sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, go ahead.
There you go.
I was just going to say, you can't have the same people fixing the problem who created it. That's all.
I was going to say, I found this yesterday, I put it on our locals. They're in Canada on the 20th. So that's Wednesday. There's going to be a 1 million March for Children. So it's going to be in like all over the country, people that are against these things that we're talking about, getting together in various cities. And it's unfortunate because when I Googled that, I immediately saw some anti-hate group, like immediately saying, oh, these people are far right. These people are Christian this, these people are you know, so there were people already trying to debunk, or not debunk, but just smear whoever was organizing. But I think that'll be a very interesting event to see, like, how big does that get? How much voice do they have? If the media even covers it.
Yeah, Miroir says every province at 9 a.m.
And there's a school walkout too, I think. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Wow. I hope that
Good
gets a
for
lot.
them.
Yeah, no
That's
kidding.
great. That's encouraging to hear.
Well, it's time for us to wrap up. Jennifer's got her solid ground group. And thank you for joining us today, Carob. It's such an important topic. It feels like we could go in lots of different directions just from this one topic, and from it and to it. There's a lot, many tentacles, and it's serious, and really concerning. Thank you to everybody who joined us in the chat, and we'll see David in 2 weeks, see if he got that facelift. I wonder about.
Could be tan. He's going somewhere warm.
Okay, so tan and also like no. Nip tucked. Yeah, just kidding, David. He's not getting a facelift. All right, see you guys later.